In this chapter, we're going to make a shooter game. If you have access to the exercise files, open up winning_screen_final.swift in the Chapter 1 folder inside of the exercise files folder to look at the game. In this game, we've replaced the mouse cursor with a crosshair graphic, and we have some star monsters that you shoot with the cursor. And as the star monsters get bigger, they attack you and you lose your energy, and you can lose the game. You can win the game, on the other hand, by destroying all of the monsters before they get too big. An animation plays for them to grow, and an animation plays when you click on them, or when you shoot them. In this chapter, we'll build this game step by step. We'll first replace the cursor, we'll copy the animation from the timeline and use it as ActionScript. We'll dynamically create the enemies with code, we'll shoot the enemies, we'll play an animation when we hit the enemies, and we'll look at how to control when you win or lose the game. So let's get started. In this movie, we'll take a look at creating a custom cursor for our game. If you're following along, I'm in cursor.fla in the Chapter 1 folder inside of the exercise files folder. First, let's take a look at this FLA file. We have 3 layers, Actions, Energy, and BG. There's nothing in the Actions layer yet, we'll write that in this movie. In the Energy layer, there is a movie clip, and I'm going to zoom out by pressing Command or Control 2 on my keyboard. There's a movie clip that's a little energy bar, which we'll use later on. And the BG layer just has a big square background movie clip. Let's look at the library. We have Cursor, which is going to be our cursor, MCBG, which is the background, MC Energy, the energy bar, and our little monster that we're going to use for this game. Let's double-click the cursor movie clip to take a look at it. I'm going to zoom in by pressing Z on my keyboard, then clicking and dragging around the cursor to see what it looks like. It's a little crosshair with an empty center. Fairly simple graphic. Let's go back to the main timeline. What we want to do is pull this cursor out of the library at runtime. If you remember how to do that, you have to right-click or Control-click the symbol and choose Linkage. And check the Export for ActionScript box. And just note the class name in the Linkage Properties dialog box. That's what you're going to use when you create a new instance of this cursor. Click OK. And if you see a warning dialog box, just click OK. It's just Flash telling you that Flash is going to create a class for you since the class doesn't already exist. Let's go to the first keyframe of the Actions layer and open up the Actions panel. The first thing we'll do is create a variable to hold our cursor. I'm just going to call it cursor, and for data type I'm going to type in movie clip. Now you may be wondering why I'm not typing cursor instead. Because the base class for cursor is movie clip. In other words, because cursor is basically a movie clip with a different class name to distinguish it from any other movie clip, we can use movie clip for the data type. Next, I'm going to declare a function called initializeGame. That's going to start our game. Let's go down a few lines. Create a function called initializeGame. The function's not going to return a value. And I'm going to run that function immediately when we run this application. So what I'm going to do is copy initializeGame in the parentheses by selecting and pressing Command-C or Control-C on the PC. I'm going to paste that at the very bottom of the code by pressing Control or Command-V. Alright, let's go inside of the initializeGame function, and we'll use our cursor variable to create a new instance of the cursor class. So cursor equals new cursor with capital C. We type cursor with a capital C here because that's what we set in the linkage properties in our library. And now this will create a new instance of the cursor from the library. The next step is to add the cursor to the stage. I'm going to use add child to do that. And then I'm going to disable the cursors. I'm going to type cursor.enabled equals false. What this will do is it will disable any mouse interactivity for the cursor. That way, when we use our mouse to click on monsters on the screen to shoot them, Flash won't think we're clicking on the cursor, but rather, Flash will know that we're clicking on the monsters. Let's go to the next line. The next thing we want to do is hide the mouse. To hide the mouse, just type mouse.hide and some parentheses. That runs the mouse.hide method, which hides the mouse. So now that the mouse is hidden, we want to connect the location of the cursor to the location of the mouse. We'll do that by using the onMouseMove event. I'm going to connect the onMouseMove to the stage. In other words, I'm going to have the stage listen for the onMouseMove event. So type stage.addEventListener. And the event is going to be mouse event mouse_move. That's all caps. As we move the mouse, we're going to run the drag cursor function. Now let's define the drag cursor function. Below the initialize game function, we'll create that function. It's going to receive an event, and the data type is mouse event. And all we're going to do here is set the cursor's X position to the X position of the mouse, and the cursor's Y position to the Y position of the mouse. Let's take a second to look over the code and make sure everything looks right. Let's test the move by pressing Command Return or Control Enter on the PC, then drag the mouse around the stage. And notice that the crosshair cursor follows the mouse position. Nice. So now you've created a custom cursor. In the next movie, we'll talk about how to take motion from a motion tween and copy that as ActionScript. And we'll use that for our monster in our game. In this movie, we're going to look at how to get ActionScript from a motion tween. If you're following along, I'm in copy_motion.fla in the Chapter 1 folder in the Exercise Files folder. In order to use this feature, we first have to create a motion tween. I'm going to create a new layer above the energy layer on the main timeline. I'm not going to name it. This is actually just going to be a scrap layer. On the layer I just created, I'm going to drag an instance of monster onto the stage. I'm not going to give it an instance name. I'm just going to create a simple motion tween. I'm going to go to frame 30 on that layer, and I'm going to press F6 on my keyboard, and that will create a keyframe. And then I'm going to use the free transform tool, and I'm going to scale up the star holding shift on my keyboard. Next, I'll create a motion tween by clicking somewhere in between these two keyframes. I'm going to right-click or control-click and choose Create Motion Tween. As I scrub the playhead back and forth, you can see the animation happening. Now this is really simple, I know, but if you want to, you can create a more elaborate animation. So feel free to do that. You could even create something along a motion path, anything you want. Once you have your animation created, you can select all the frames that contain your animation. And yes, this can contain multiple keyframes, complex motion paths, anything you want. So I'm going to select the first keyframe, and then I'm going to hold Shift on my keyboard, and I'm going to click the last keyframe. So I have a selection of all the frames in my tween. Now I'm going to right-click my selection, and then choose Copy Motion as ActionScript 3.0. And this will copy all the information in this tween and convert it to XML and ActionScript. So I'm going to click this button, and then Flash gives me a little prompt that asks me an instance name to use in the ActionScript. I'm going to paste this code inside of the monster movie clip. I'm not going to give anything an instance name, so I'm just going to type this, and then click OK. I don't have any code, it's just copied. So I can delete my scrap layer now. I don't need that anymore. I'm going to double-click the monster movie clip in the library. I'm going to select the first keyframe of the Actions layer and open the Actions panel. And now I can simply paste the code by clicking in the Actions panel and pressing Command-V or Control-V on the PC. Look at all this code that Flash created for me. Now, if you had a motion path or you had other complex animations, this might be a lot more code. But this is all of the information from that tween in the form of XML. And I'm actually not going to cover what this all means, but if you want to learn more about it, you can look up the Animator class in Flash Help. The Animator class not only controls complex animations like this, but using the Animator class, you also have access to events and methods and properties that you can modify. I want to work with some events with the Animator class because I want when this thing scales up all the way to the top or finishes its animation, that's what's going to say it took too long to shoot this monster and so the player gets hurt. So in order to respond to events that happen with the Animator class, we need to import the motion event class. So let's go to the second line of code. Right below import fl.motion.animator. I'm going to import the motion event class. So type import fl.motion.motionEvent. And let's go all the way down to the bottom of this code. And below everything else, I'm going to add an event listener to this _animator. And that's the animator instance that's created in my code on line 24. So once this animation finishes, then it's going to execute this event. So let's go to the very bottom of the code, type this underscore animator dot add event listener. The event's going to be a data type of motion event dot motion underscore end, and that's all caps. The function we're going to run is hurt player. Now let's define the hurt player function. Let's go down a few lines, create a new function called hurt player. That's going to receive an event. The data type is motion event. It's not going to return a value. And at this point, all we're going to do is make the movie clip disappear. Later on, we'll create a point system, and the user will get points as they click on the monsters, and they'll lose energy as the monsters hit them. But for now, we'll just remove child to unload this movie clip. So let's type this.parent.remove child, and in parentheses, we'll pass in this. So it will sort of remove itself after the motion is finished. So now if you test the movie right now, nothing will happen because there's no instance of the monster on the stage. So let's just create a test instance real quick by closing the Actions panel, returning to Scene 1. Let's create a new scrap layer and just drop an instance of monster onto the stage. Let's test the movie by pressing Command Return on the Mac or Control Enter on the PC. Notice that it scales up and then disappears once it gets to the full scale. Our mission was a success. Let's throw away our scrap layer. In the next movie, we'll take a look at creating monsters dynamically using ActionScript. In this movie, we'll use ActionScript to create the enemies in our game. If you're following along, I'm in creating_enemies.fla in the Chapter 1 folder in the exercise files folder. Before we go to ActionScript, we need to export our monster for ActionScript so we can create them with ActionScript. I'm going to right-click or control-click monster in the library and choose linkage. Check Export for ActionScript. Note the class name, monster, which is what we'll use when we create the monsters. Click OK. If another box comes up, click OK also. Let's go to the first keyframe of the Actions layer and open the Actions panel. The first thing we'll need to do is create some variables that we're going to be working with. Above where we created the cursor variable, at the very top of the code, I'm going to create a variable called monsters in game. And this is going to be a positive integer. I'll give the value inside of the initialize game function. This is going to represent how many monsters are in our game. On the next line, I'm going to create a variable called monster maker. And this is going to be a timer. And this will create our monsters at a certain timed interval. On the next line, I'm going to create a container movie clip that will hold all of our monsters. I call this container_MC. Now inside the initialize game function, we'll give all these variables values. I'm going to do that above all the other code we wrote inside the initialize game function. I'm going to set monsters in game equal to 10. I'm going to set monster maker equal to a new instance of the timer class. And for the delay, we'll have 1000 milliseconds, or 1 second. And for the repeat count, I'm going to type monsters in game. So every second, our timer will create a monster until it's created as many monsters as we say should be in the game. And now we'll use our container_MC variable to create a new instance of the movie clip class. And before we do anything else, let's just make sure to add that container to the stage. So I'm going to use add child, and I put container_MC on the stage. Go down a few lines. I'm going to use the monster maker timer, and I'm going to add an event listener that's going to tell Flash what's going to happen as the timer runs. So type monster maker dot add event listener. The event type is timer event. And the name of the event is timer in all caps. What I'm going to run is create monsters. Go down to the next line, and I'm going to start the timer. Monster maker dot start. Now we'll define the create monsters function. Let's scroll down to the bottom of the code, and right below where we define the drag cursor function, I'm going to define the create monsters function. Remember, it receives an event. The data type is going to be timer event. Doesn't return a value. And inside of this function, let's create a variable called monster. And the data type is movie clip. We'll set monster equal to a new instance of the monster class. And we'll set the monster's x and y values to be random. Let's type monster.x equals math.random times stage.stagewidth. And this will put the monster in a random position on the stage, or the x position will be a random position as wide as the stage. Let's go to the next line, do the same thing for the monster's y position. So monster.y equals math.random times stage.stageheight. And now if we wanted to, we could put this in a loop, and every time the timer runs, we could create multiple monsters. But for now, let's just leave the code like this, and one monster will be created every second. You can feel free to modify the code if you want to. Let's go to the next line, and we'll put the monster on the stage using addChild. And we'll put it inside of the container_MC movie clip. So container_MC.addChild monster. Check the code to make sure everything looks right, and test the movie. And there are our monsters. And notice they get created. There should be 10 of them, and then they should stop being created. And that looked like that was 10. So let's close this window. And we've successfully created some monsters using ActionScript. In the next movie, we'll add some interactivity to our monsters by making them disappear when we click on them. In this movie, we'll take a look at making the monsters disappear when you click on or shoot them. If you're following along, I'm in shooting.fla in the Chapter 1 folder inside of the exercise files folder. Let's go inside of the monster movie clip by double-clicking it inside of the library. Let's go to the first keyframe of the actions layer and open the actions panel. Below all of the code inside of this movie clip, I'm going to add an event listener to this. This being this monster, the monster that's created on the main timeline. So this.addEventListener. The event's going to be a mouse event. .click, all caps. Then when we click on a monster, we're going to run the kill monster function. Now let's define the kill monster function. Remember, it's going to receive a mouse event. And the first thing that we want to do is have it stop listening for the motion to finish. Because if we just make this movie clip disappear, then it's going to still be looking for that motion finish, and it's going to give you an error. So what you need to do is type this_animator dot remove event listener, and that's motion event dot motion_end, all caps, and then hurt player. Go to the next line, and then we'll remove this object from the display list by typing this.parent.removeChild, and then we'll pass in the parentheses this. Let's test the movie. Press Command Return or Control Enter. Click on the monsters, and they disappear. Nice. Close this window, and now we've added interactivity to the monsters. The next step is to make an animation play when we click on the monsters. To do that, we'll use copy motion again, and we'll make an animation play when you click on the monster. That's what we'll do in the next movie. In this movie, we'll make our monsters play an animation when we click on them instead of just disappearing. If you're following along, I'm in destroying.fla in the Chapter 1 folder inside of the exercise files folder. Let's first go inside of the monster movie clip. I'm going to double-click the monster movie clip icon in the library to enter its timeline. Then select the first keyframe of the actions layer and open the actions panel. I'm going to scroll down to the bottom of the code, and I'm going to select the kill monster function and press Command or Control C on my keyboard to copy it. I'm going to go down a few lines and paste that code and make a few modifications. I'm going to change the name of the function from kill monster to die. I'm going to change the event type to motion event instead of mouse event. In just a minute, we'll put some different code inside of the kill monster function. That function will run when the monster is clicked, and then an animation will play, and once that animation is finished, then the die function will run. Now we don't have the code to create that animation yet, and we're going to get that code by using copy motion just like we did with the other animation for the monster. So before we do that, let's just delete the code inside of the kill monster function, close the actions panel, and return to the main timeline. Just like we did before, we're going to create a scrap layer to hold our animation. I'm going to create that layer above the energy layer and drag an instance of monster from the library onto the stage. I'm going to select frame 5 in that layer and press F6 on my keyboard to create a keyframe. Then I'm going to click between the two keyframes and right-click or control-click and choose Create Motion Tween. For this animation, I want it to kind of rotate, shrink down, and fade out at the same time. So first I'm going to set the rotation. In the Property Inspector, for the Rotate dropdown, I'm going to choose CW for clockwise and leave it at default 1 time. Then I'm going to select the last keyframe and select the monster on the stage, and for color choose Alpha and drag the slider down to 0 if it's not already there. Next, I just want to scale this down a little bit, so I'm going to select the Free Transform tool and drag one of the corner handles and hold Shift on my keyboard to constrain the proportions and shrink it down a little bit. I'm going to scrub the playhead to preview the animation. That looks great. If you prefer to have a little more exciting animation, feel free to do that. The next step is to copy this animation. So I'm going to select the first keyframe in this layer and then shift-click the last keyframe. Then I'm going to right-click my selection and choose Copy Motion as ActionScript 3.0. For the instance name, just like the last time we did this, the instance name is going to be this. Going to click OK, and we can just delete that scrap layer. And then we can go back inside of the monster movie clip by double-clicking the monster movie clip icon in the library. Let's go to the first keyframe of the Actions layer and open up the Actions panel. Inside of the kill monster function, I'm going to paste the code that I copied using copy motion. To paste it, I'm pressing Command V on my keyboard. That's Control V on the PC. At the top of this function, we'll see a few things that we don't need. First off, we don't need to import the animator class because we already imported it at the very beginning of the code inside of this frame. So I'm going to delete that line. I'm going to delete var and the space before this XML because we already have a variable called this XML which was created at the top of this ActionScript as well. Also do not need to declare a data type. So instead of creating a new variable, we're just giving a new value to a current variable. Then I'm going to scroll down to the bottom of this function and make a few more adjustments. I'm going to delete var in the space on line 63 in my code, and then I'm going to delete :animator on that same line. Again, this variable was already created at the top of the code, and so I'm just giving it a new value here. This animation will start playing whenever you click on an instance of the monster movie clip. The next step is to add an event listener to this animator so that once it's done animating, the movie clip will disappear or unload. So let's go down a few lines, type this_animator .add event listener. The type is motion event .motion_end, all caps. Then we're going to run the die function. And that's the one that we created in the last movie. That makes the object disappear. You might want to take a second to look over the code and make sure you understand what it's doing. And after that, test the movie by pressing Command Return or Control Enter. Notice that when I click on the monsters, they play the animation and then unload. Nice. So all that we have left is to decide how we win or lose the game. And we'll do that in the next movie. In this movie, we'll take a look at how to react to winning or losing our game. If you're following along, I'm in winning.fla in the Chapter 1 folder inside of the Exercise Files folder. I'm going to go back to Scene 1, select the first keyframe in the Actions layer, and open the Actions panel. Then I'm going to scroll to the top of the code. The first thing we need to create is a way to win and a way to lose. So the way that we can create a way to win is to create a variable called score that holds the player's score. So below the variables we've created so far, we'll create a new variable called score. And the data type will be an integer. and we'll set the value inside of the initialize game function. And we'll create a variable called energy, and this is how you can lose if your energy runs out. And that will also be an integer. Inside of the initialize game function, at the bottom of all the code that we've written so far, let's set values for the variables that we created. First, we'll set the score value equal to 0. And that's the current score, so the game starts and the player has a score of 0. On the next line, we'll set the value for the energy variable. Energy will equal energy underscore MC, and that's the energy bar movie clip dot total frames. Now let's just step away for a second from this real quick and take a look at that movie clip. So I'm going to close the actions panel and I'm going to double click MC energy in the library. And it's really simple, it just has 3 frames. And so the energy would be 3. So each time we get hit, we go down 1. And if energy is less than 1, then we lose the game. So let's go back to scene 1. Go back to our actions. And below the last line of code we wrote, let's type energy underscore MC dot go to and stop. In parentheses, we'll pass in energy. And we can copy and paste that line of code later so we can reuse it. Let's scroll down. So now that we have defined some variables that can help us win or lose, let's define functions that determine whether we've won or lost. So below the create monsters function, I'm going to define a new function, and this is going to be called increase score. Alright, so the first thing we'll do to increase the score is we'll add 1 to it. So type score plus plus, and if that's unfamiliar or haven't used it in a while, that increments a value by 1. So if it's 0 when this code runs, it'll go to 1, and if it's 1, it'll go to 2, and so on. On the next line, we'll write a conditional statement to see if the score is a winning score. We'll type if score is greater than or equal to monsters in game. So in other words, if they killed all the monsters, then we'll do something. And for now, we'll stop the timer. So type monster maker dot stop, and then we'll just trace you win. Pretty straightforward. Now we'll create a function that will happen to decrease our energy. So type function decrease energy. First thing we want to do is subtract 1 from our current energy. Just like we can increment by 1, we can decrement by 1 as well. So type energy minus minus. And now we could use the code where we said energy underscore MC go to and stop energy. But what if energy is too low? In other words, what if their energy is 0 and we try to go to and stop at 0? We might get an error in our code. So I'm going to just type if energy is less than or equal to 0. Type monster maker dot stop, just because we want to stop the timer. And then we'll trace you lose. And below that, we'll put an else statement. And so if energy is 1 or greater, then we'll have the energy movie clip go to and stop at the energy frame. So type energy underscore MC dot go to and stop. And we'll pass in energy, as we know this is going to be 1 or more. Now, setting up an energy bar this way is just the way I did it for this exercise. If you wanted to do it a different way, you could be creative. You could have 100 frames, and then you could take away 10 from energy each time. So you're not stuck just doing it this way. When does our score increase or decrease? It increases when we kill a monster, and it decreases when we get hit by a monster. So if we want to make these functions run, we should run them in the same place where the code runs, where we hit the monster, or where the monster hits us, and that's inside of the monster movie clip. So I'm going to close the actions panel. I'm going to double click monster in the library, select the first keyframe in the actions layer, and open up the Actions panel. I'm just adding a little bit of code inside of here to make those functions run from the main timeline. Let's scroll to about line 29, and that's in my code. On your code, it might look a little bit different, might be a different line. And what we need to do is run a function that's on the main timeline. So how do we access a function that's on the main timeline from inside of another movie clip? Well, we know that the parent of the monster movie clip is container_MC that's created on the main timeline. The parent of that movie clip is the main timeline that holds all of our functions. So what we need to do is create a variable. I'm creating this inside of the hurt_player function, and I'm just going to call this main to represent the main timeline. And the data type's going to be movie clip, and I'm going to set that equal to, and I could type this.parent.parent, but Flash might give me an error because parents are always display objects. And so we need to tell Flash that I want to speak about a movie clip, and so that way I can have access to its functions. So this is an important step. So you want to wrap this inside of movie clip and some parentheses, and inside of the parentheses I'm going to type this.parent, which is, again, container_MC. And when I type .parent again, I'm referencing the main timeline. So now I can speak to this main variable as if it were a movie clip. And so I can call a function that's on the main timeline in this way. So I'm going to go to the next line, and I'm going to type main.decrease energy. And this function is going to run whenever the hurt_player function runs, or whenever the movie clip scales too big, or the monster is too big and then unloads. So that hurts the player, the energy goes down. What I'm going to do is copy these two lines of code because we're basically doing the same thing both times. So I'm going to just select these two lines, press Command or Control-C to copy them, and then scroll down and find the die function. At the very top of the die function, I'm going to paste code that I copied by pressing Command or Control-V. And instead of main.decrease energy, I'm going to type main.increase score. So when we kill a monster, our score goes up. And when we hit a monster, our energy goes down. So now we test the movie and watch the code in action. And then click on all the monsters. And I should get the "you win" message if I get all of them in time. And there we go. Great. And now I'm going to close this window and test the movie again. And I should get the "you lose" message if I don't hit all of them in time. Now I'm waiting. I'm going to watch my energy bar, and it goes down each time I get hit by a monster. And I lost. And so now we can control winning and losing the game. Now you don't obviously have to just trace "you win" or "you lose." You can do whatever you want, but you put that code there that happens whenever you win or lose the game. And now that we can control winning and losing the game, let's give a little visual to our user to show them that they won, so it's not just a message in the output window. We'll do that in the next movie. In this movie, we'll take a look at how to make the winning or losing message appear on the screen as opposed to in the output window. If you're following along, I'm in winning_screen.fla in the Chapter 1 folder inside of the exercise files folder. This file is the same file we've been working with up to this point, except there's one addition in the library. I've added a movie clip called Win-Lose. Let's take a look at that movie clip by double-clicking it in the library. This movie clip is fairly simple. On the stage, there's an instance of MCBG. That's just a background. And then there's a dynamic text field with an instance name of end_txt. We'll use this text field to display the winning or losing message. Let's go back to scene 1. Go to the first keyframe of the Actions layer and open the Actions panel. Inside of the Actions panel, scroll down to where we have our winning and losing text. Find the trace statement inside of the increase score function and decrease energy functions. I'm going to double-click trace, and I'm going to replace that with show win with capital W and then lose with capital L. This is going to be a function that we create, and we'll pass in the "you win" string or "you lose" string. I'm going to double-click show win lose. Press Command-C on my keyboard, Control-C on the PC to copy it. Then I'm going to go down to the decrease energy function and double-click trace, and then press Command or Control-V to paste that same code. Now let's define the show win lose function. I'm going to define that at the very bottom of my functions. So type function show win lose, and it's going to receive a parameter called end message. The data type is, of course, a string. And all this function is going to do is create a new win-lose object. and then have the text field display the text that's passed in as the end message parameter. Type var, then a space, win, lose with capital L. The data type will be movie clip. Set it equal to new, space, win with capital W, and lose with capital L, and some parentheses and a semicolon. And win-lose is the name of the movie clip in the library. And we'll have to set the linkage property in the library, so I'm going to close the Actions panel. I'm going to right-click or control-click win-lose in the library, select a linkage, check the Export for ActionScript box, and then click OK. Let's go back to the first keyframe of the Actions layer and open the Actions panel, and go back to the Show Win-Lose function. So now we've created a new instance of win-lose. We need to put it on the stage. So add child, and we'll pass in win-lose. And the last thing we need to do is make the text field display the end message. So type win-lose dot end underscore txt. Remember, that's the name of the text field on the stage of the win-lose movie clip. Type dot text, space equals space, end message. Test the movie. I'm going to lose the game first. And watch the screen show you lose. Nice. I'm going to test the movie again. Command return or control enter. And I'm going to win the game by killing all the monsters. And I get the you win message. And there's our completed game. Congratulations. You may have noticed that when you play through the game, and if you get hit once, it's impossible to win the game. Now let's say that we wanted to be able to have some control over that, and you still be able to win the game if you get hit. Let's take a look at how that would work. Select the first keyframe of the Actions layer and open the Actions panel by pressing Option F9 on the Mac or F9 on the PC. One way to overcome this bug is to actually give a point each time the player gets hit. That way, the player's score will continue to go up, so the player will still have to get through the game with some energy left over. So let's scroll down in your code to find the decrease energy function. What we're going to do is run the increase score function at the bottom of this decrease energy function to not only decrease the player's energy, but to increase the player's score. So type increase score with a capital S, some parentheses and a semicolon. So I'll test the movie, and I'm going to destroy the first monster and get hit by at least one of the monsters, then make it through the rest of the game, destroying all the other monsters, and see if I get the you win screen. And turns out I do. And there's a look at troubleshooting your game.